Congressman, thanks again for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, when your constituents, our audience, hears about a metadata collection program, you sit on the Intelligence Committee, I'm curious, is this the price of protection, or has the government gone too far?
Well, I personally think the government's gone a little far. You know, you look back at the U.S. government's reaction to 9/11, obviously a horrific event for people in this area, for people around the country. An awful lot of money was thrown at the security system generally, and of course the Patriot Act really dramatically increased the authorities and the powers that the government has to, amongst other things, surveil. And I think at this point, partly because of the revelations of Edward Snowden, the American public is coming to learn what some of these programs involved and expressing, concern, as did, of course, the federal judge, as did the president's panel. I happen to believe, and the reason I'm a little careful about talking about this stuff is there's a lot of misinformation out there, people thinking that the NSA is listening to their phone calls and that sort of thing. But I happen to believe that these programs have probably overstepped what most of us feel are our inherent rights to privacy.
I'm curious, you as a member of the Intelligence Committee, how much transparency do you see? How much do you know about this program, and how much are even you and your colleagues in the dark?
Well, here's the thing. Those who think that the NSA or the CIA or any of the intelligence agencies are are either breaking the law deliberately or are trying to keep Congress in the dark, that's simply not true. I've gotten to know a lot of these people. They care a lot about their country. They care a lot about abiding by the Constitution. However, we're talking about a massive and sprawling intelligence apparatus here. The NSA itself is a huge organization, and it's one of 16 other or 17 other intelligence agencies out there, intelligence groups, and it's just very difficult for the layperson who's charged with congressional oversight to really, first of all, learn the technology, to learn the law, and then to just deal with the information that is coming in. I mean, there are literally hundreds of programs out there that are designed to pick up information which may prevent a terrorist attack or which may give us a leg up on our enemies. And it's just very, very difficult, particularly since the process of getting that information about these programs is not exactly systematized. It's very hard, even for somebody like me who sits on the committee, to get my head around everything that's out there.
Yeah, obviously this isn't in a vacuum. The Edward Snowden situation plays into this. You, I'm sure, saw the 60 Minutes conversation where even some of the Intelligence community, said maybe they'd consider a deal if it was up to them. The president seems circumspect at best on it, that would give, in effect, Snowden amnesty if he turned over all the documents and all the information that he took with him. How do you feel about that?
Well, look, I personally don't think that's a good idea. And the reason I don't think that's a good idea is because I don't want the next guy to think that just because what he or she thinks is out of control. And remember, we're talking about the judgment in this case of a guy who's in his mid-20s who had all kinds of other problems in the military and school and whatnot. We just can't run a government in which it is, put it this way, it's at the mercy of the judgment of 26-year-olds. And so, no, I don't favor actually giving Edward Snowden amnesty. He did break the law. He did put this country at risk. And it doesn't mean that I don't think that the discussion that has ensued has not been a helpful discussion. I think it's important in a democracy to constantly have some sense of what your government's powers are and what it can do. But getting there via the disclosure of highly classified information is just obviously not the way you want to get there. So, what Edward Snowden should do is he's styling himself, sort of in the tradition of civil disobedience. In the tradition of civil disobedience, Edward Snowden should say, I think the government was doing bad things. I'm going to expose it, and then I'm going to bear the consequences, which means coming back and standing trial in which, we can sort of hear his reasoning, and he can, in the tradition of civil disobedience, bear the consequences of the decisions he chose to make.
An issue we've heard not just from the president, from the Pope, we've seen it in some mayoral elections around here, is income inequality. And a lot of folks tell me you're going to hear this issue front and center in 2014 because the gap between have and have-nots in recent memory hasn't been this wide. Do you think that will manifest itself whether we're talking about extending unemployment benefits, when we're talking about minimum wage, when we're talking about food stamps, a whole bunch of programs that seemingly more and more millions of Americans need every year? Is this going to be an issue, a big one, when you guys get back on the Hill?
Well, it's not so much more and more Americans needing every year. Look, we're on the back end of an absolutely devastating, what we're now calling the Great Recession. I mean, what happened in 2008 was unlike anything we'd seen in this country since 1929 and the 1930s and the Great Depression. We still have millions of people out there who are unemployed who would rather not be unemployed. So to my way of thinking, now is not the moment. Now of all times in this season to say, sorry, we're cutting off that $300 a month to you that you use to put food on the table, or to say, that this is the moment to cut off food stamps to people who are relying on those food stamps, to put food on the table. So I certainly hope that we get back to it, I'm going to certainly fight in January to make sure that our these are people who are very, very vulnerable in very, very difficult straits, that we are there with a safety net to make sure that their kids are not going hungry. So, the larger issue of income inequality, which you raised, is something that we also, I think, have to really begin to address somewhat, and how we address it is critical. All too often in the anger of the political arena, it becomes, the only solution, of course, is, higher taxes on people who are doing well, and of course that's part of it. But the discussion I hope we can see is, how can we craft a system where everybody has the opportunity to succeed, to have a minimum level of well-being, that anybody who wants to work hard has the opportunity to live the American dream, and make sure that that takes us into a conversation about our public schools, about how people get hired, about how easy it is to start companies that employ lots of people. That's where I hope we go with this, in addition to the talk we have about how do we make our tax code more progressive and that kind of thing.
Finally, Congressman, a few years ago I was sitting down with Senator Menendez, who, like you, except in the Senate, had the responsibility of fundraising here to elect fellow Democrats to the Senate. And he said, I'm going to have to sit down and figure out what I did to get Harry Reid so mad at me. But you have this job now in the House to get fellow Democrats elected. I saw a number that at this same point in George W. Bush's second term, his approval rating sat at the same number now President Obama sits at. And they lost 30 seats there in that year. What are the challenges with Democrats, with health care, with a president that's not too popular as we go to the end of the year now? How difficult will it be for Democrats to hold, let alone take back the House in November?
Well, the answer to that question varies by the week in which you ask it. And, of course, coming out of the shutdown, of course, the Republicans were flat on their backs. They'd been hammered in the polls. And then right behind that came the trouble with the health care website, and that hurt the Democrats. So it's a little early to call November 2014. But, I do what I do, and I try to help fellow Democrats because, look at what we've seen in the last just year alone. The other party saying we're going to shut down the government if we don't get our way. We are going to default on the nation's debt with the devastating consequences that would have, not just here in the U.S. and globally. Oh, and by the way, we're going to eliminate food stamps and unemployment insurance at the very moment when people need it most. I'm not one, given the district I represent, that necessarily jumps, head first into the partisan fray. But then when those are the choices, when we're up against that kind of philosophy, it puts a little spring in my step to try to make sure that people get elected who are about opportunity for the middle class in this country and doing right by Americans.
Hey, Congressman, I know you got a busy day here, and I want to wish you a happy holidays. Thank you so much for a few minutes. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard. Same to all of you. Take care.